In the quiet village of Umuahia, nestled between lush green hills and a winding river, two children formed a bond stronger than steel. Ao, a bright-eyed girl with skin that glowed like polished ebony, and Jimmy, a scrappy boy with an infectious laugh, were inseparable. Ao lived with her parents in a small mud house, where the scent of her mother's cooking often wafted through the air. Her father, Pa Okoye, was a proud farmer who worked tirelessly in the fields to provide for his family. Though they were poor, they were happy. Ao would often sit on her father's lap under the shade of the big mango tree, listening to his stories about courage, love, and sacrifice. Jimmy, on the other hand, was the son of the village carpenter. He was known for his quick wit and adventurous spirit, always dreaming of life beyond the village. Together, Ao and Jimmy were a team. They climbed trees, fetched water from the stream, and chased fireflies at night. Ao, one day, I will take you to the city, Jimmy often said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. We will live in a big house and eat jollof rice every day. Ao would laugh and roll her eyes. Jimmy, you dream too much. Who will fetch water and sweep the compound if we leave the village? But in her heart, she loved his dreams. They gave her hope, something she needed more than she realized. Life in the village was simple, but it was also harsh. The harvest had not been good for a few years, and Pa Okoye began to worry about how he would provide for his family. One evening, after a long day in the fields, he called Ao's mother, Mama Nkechi, to their small veranda. Nkechi, I have to borrow money from the king, he said, his voice heavy. Mama Nkechi's face fell. Okoye, you know what that means. The king never gives without taking something in return. I have no choice, Pa Okoye replied. The children must eat, and we must pay their school fees. Unbeknownst to them, Ao was nearby listening. Though she didn't fully understand the weight of her father's decision, she sensed trouble. As the years went by, Ao and Jimmy grew closer. They walked to school together, shared meals, and even helped each other with chores. Their bond was no longer just friendship, it was budding love. One day, as they sat by the riverbank skipping stones, Jimmy turned to Ao. Do you think we'll always be this close? Ao smiled. Of course, Jimmy. You're my best friend. We'll never change. Jimmy looked away, his cheeks darkening. What if I want to be more than your friend? Ao's heart skipped a beat, but she laughed to hide her feelings. You're so silly, Jimmy. Let's go before Mama starts worrying. But deep down, she knew her feelings for Jimmy were more than friendship too. The village celebrated life with festivals and dances, and Ao and Jimmy were often at the center of it all. On one such evening, under the glow of lanterns and the rhythm of drums, they danced like nothing else mattered. But trouble was brewing. Pa Okoye's debt to the king was growing. Though he tried to repay it little by little, the interest kept mounting. One day, a messenger from the palace came to their home with a warning. The king grows impatient, the man said, his voice cold. If the debt is not paid soon, he will take what is owed in another way. Pa Okoye was shaken, but he kept the news from his family, hoping for a miracle. After completing secondary school, Jimmy decided to leave the village to seek better opportunities in the city. It was a tearful goodbye. I promise to come back for you, Ao, Jimmy said, holding her hands tightly. Wait for me. Ao nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'll wait, Jimmy. I'll always wait. As Jimmy boarded the rickety bus that would take him to the city, Ao felt a deep ache in her heart. She didn't know then that her life was about to take a dark turn, one that would test the strength of their bond. Life in Umuahia continued with its quiet rhythm, but for Ao's family, a storm was brewing. After Jimmy's departure to the city, Ao felt a void she couldn't explain. She spent her days helping her mother and her evenings staring at the moon, wondering if Jimmy was staring at it too. But just as Ao began to adjust to life without her best friend, tragedy struck. It was a humid morning when Pa Okoye collapsed in the field. He had been working tirelessly, hoping to gather enough harvest to repay the debt owed to the king. When the news reached Ao and her mother, they rushed to the field, only to find him lying still, his hands clutching the soil. Mama Nkechi wailed as she cradled her husband's lifeless body. "Okena, who will take care of us now?" Ao knelt beside her father, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to scream, to shake him awake, but he was gone. The villagers came to console the family, bringing food and offering kind words. But as the days turned into weeks, Ao and her mother were left alone to face the harsh reality of their situation. One evening, a loud knock came at their door. Mama Nkechi opened it to find a royal messenger standing there, his expression stern. "The king has sent me to remind you of the debt your husband owed," the man said, handing her a scroll. Mama Nkechi's hands trembled as she read the document. The amount owed was far greater than she had imagined. "Please give us more time," she begged. "My husband has just died. We have nothing." The messenger's voice was cold. "The king does not wait. If the debt is not paid, he will claim what is rightfully his." Ao stood behind her mother, her heart pounding. She didn't fully understand what the messenger meant, but the fear in her mother's eyes told her it was something terrible. As the seasons passed, Ao grew into a young woman whose beauty captured the attention of the entire village. Her skin glowed like the morning sun, and her laughter was like the song of a bird. Men of all ages whispered about her, and young suitors came to Mama Nkechi's doorstep with gifts, hoping to win her hand. But Mama Nkechi turned them all away. "Ao is still a child," she would say, "and we have more pressing matters." The whispers soon reached the palace, and the Prince Okoye took notice. Known for his cold heart and insatiable appetite for power, Prince Okoye was searching for a wife. When he heard of Ao's beauty, he was intrigued. "She will make a fine addition to my collection," the prince said, a sinister smile spreading across his face.
One fateful morning, Mama Nkechi and Ao were summoned to the palace. The grand hall was filled with the scent of incense and the murmurs of courtiers. The king sat on his golden throne, his eyes piercing. Beside him stood Prince Okoye, his expression unreadable. "The debt your husband owed remains unpaid," the king said, his voice booming. "And now, the time has come to settle it." Mama Nkechi fell to her knees. "Please, your majesty, we have nothing left to give." The king's gaze shifted to Ao. "You may have nothing, but your daughter is something." Ao froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean, my lord?" The king smiled. "She will marry my son, Prince Okoye, as payment for the debt." The words felt like a blow to Ao's chest. "No," she cried. "I don't want to marry the prince." Prince Okoye stepped forward, his eyes cold. "You don't have a choice, girl. Your family owes us, and you are the payment." Mama Nkechi sobbed, but she was powerless to refuse the king's command. "Ao, forgive me," she whispered. That night, Ao sat alone under the mango tree where she used to listen to her father's stories. Her world felt like it was crumbling around her. How could her life be reduced to a mere transaction? She thought of Jimmy and the promises they had made. "Jimmy, where are you?" she whispered to the stars. "I need you now more than ever." Umwahia. Ao considered running away, but where would she go? The thought of escaping filled her with both hope and fear. The next morning, the villagers gathered to witness Ao being taken to the palace. Some pitied her, while others gossiped about her beauty and the prince's interest in her. As the royal carriage arrived, Ao stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. As the carriage rumbled away, taking Ao to the palace, she felt a mix of anger, fear, and despair. She vowed to herself that she would not let the prince break her spirit. Little did she know, her journey was just beginning, and the trials ahead would test her courage in ways she could never imagine. The royal palace of Umwahia was a stark contrast to the simplicity of Ao's village. Its walls were adorned with gold and ivory, its halls echoing with the footsteps of servants and guards. But to Ao, it felt more like a gilded cage than a home. As she stepped out of the carriage, her heart sank. Prince Okoye stood waiting for her at the palace entrance, his cold eyes scanning her from head to toe. He didn't smile. Instead, he nodded curtly and turned away, as though she were no more significant than a piece of furniture. "This is your new home now," he said without looking back. Ao was led to a small room in the east wing, far away from the main quarters where the prince resided. The room was richly decorated, but its grandeur only made her feel more isolated. As she sat on the edge of the plush bed, tears welled up in her eyes. She thought of her mother, left alone in the village to bear the shame of what had happened. She thought of Jimmy, who had promised to return but was nowhere to be found. And she thought of herself, a girl whose life had been taken from her. "I will not let them break me," she whispered into the darkness. "I am more than this." In the days that followed, Ao began to see the full extent of Prince Okoye's cruelty. He was a man who thrived on power, using fear to control those around him. Servants trembled in his presence, and his wives, 3 before Ao, walked with downcast eyes, their spirits broken. At first, the prince seemed indifferent to Ao. He would summon her to sit beside him during meals or to accompany him during formal events, but he rarely spoke to her. When he did, his words were sharp and dismissive. "You should be grateful," he told her one evening. "Many girls would kill to be in your position." Ao clenched her fists under the table, fighting the urge to respond. She had learned quickly that defiance only earned her punishment. It wasn't long before Ao became the target of jealousy and resentment within the palace. The other wives saw her as a threat, believing her beauty would win the prince's favor. Lady Ijeoma, the first wife, was particularly hostile. "You think you're special because you're young and pretty?" Ijeoma hissed one evening. "Let me tell you something, girl. The prince doesn't care about you. You're just another trophy for his collection." Ao tried to avoid conflict, but the tension in the palace was palpable. She felt like a lone bird in a forest full of predators, unsure of whom to trust. One night, overwhelmed by despair, Ao decided she could no longer endure the life she was forced into. She crept out of her room and made her way to the palace gates, her heart pounding with every step. The guard stopped her before she could get far. "Where do you think you're going?" one of them asked, his voice mocking. "I need to leave," Ao said, her voice trembling but firm. "I don't belong here." The guards laughed. "No one leaves the prince's palace without his permission. Go back to your room before you make things worse for yourself." Defeated, Ao returned to her quarters. But in that moment, a seed of determination was planted in her heart. She might not be able to escape now, but she vowed to find a way. Meanwhile, back in the village, the people of Umuahia were abuzz with rumors about Ao's life in the palace. Some said she had been chosen as the prince's favorite, while others claimed she was being mistreated. Mama Nkechi heard these whispers, but kept her head down, too ashamed to face the world. She prayed every night for her daughter's safety and for Jimmy's return. Jimmy's name still lingered in the hearts of those who remembered his promises to Ao. If only Jimmy were here, they said. He would never have let this happen. In the bustling city of Port Harcourt, Jimmy was thriving. He had built a successful real estate business and was quickly becoming one of the most respected men in the city. But despite his success, he never forgot Ao. One day, during a visit to a friend from the village, Jimmy heard the devastating news. "Ao," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She was taken to the palace to pay off her father's debt." His friend nodded. "It's been months now. Everyone says the prince is treating her badly." Jimmy's heart shattered. He had left the village to build a better future for himself and Ao, but he had failed to protect her when she needed him most. "I have to go back," he said, his voice filled with resolve.
As Jimmy prepared to return, life in the palace grew darker for Ao. The prince, bored with his other wives, began to demand more of her. He expected her to smile, to obey, to play the role of the perfect wife. One evening, he summoned her to his chambers. "You will bear me a son," he said, as though it were a simple command. Ao felt her blood run cold. "I will not," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. The prince's eyes narrowed. "You forget your place," he said, his tone dangerous. "You belong to me, Ao, and you will do as I say." Ao's defiance only fueled her determination to escape. She knew she couldn't survive much longer under the prince's control. Ao's days in the palace began to blur together, each one filled with fear, loneliness, and a growing sense of despair. The grand halls, glittering with gold and marble, felt cold and lifeless. She longed for the simplicity of her village, where she could run barefoot through the fields and sit under the mango tree with her father's stories echoing in her ears. But in the palace, even the air seemed heavy, as though it carried the weight of secrets and sorrow. Ao quickly learned that survival required silence and submission, two things that didn't come naturally to her. Prince Okoye's true nature became increasingly evident. His temper was as sharp as a blade, and his ego demanded constant validation. Servants were punished for the slightest mistakes, and the wives who displeased him were shunned, left to wander the palace like ghosts. Ao became his new target for control. One day, during a grand banquet attended by nobles from across the kingdom, the prince demanded that Ao sit beside him. She reluctantly obeyed, her heart pounding as she felt the eyes of the other wives on her. "Smile," the prince ordered, leaning close to her ear. Ao forced a weak smile, but her discomfort was evident. When she reached for a glass of water, her hand trembled, and the cup slipped, spilling its contents onto the table. The hall fell silent. The prince's expression darkened. "Clumsy girl," he hissed. Ao's cheeks burned with humiliation as the guests laughed softly. That night, she cried herself to sleep, feeling more trapped than ever. Despite the coldness of the palace, Ao found small moments of kindness among the servants. A maid named Chica, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, took a liking to her. "You remind me of my daughter," Chica said one evening as she brought Ao a tray of food. "She's about your age." Ao felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you, Chica," she said softly. Chica began sneaking Ao small comforts, a warm blanket on a cold night, an extra portion of food, or even just a kind word. These moments gave Ao a sliver of hope, a reminder that not everyone in the palace was cruel. Though she was outwardly compliant, Ao refused to let the prince break her spirit. She found small ways to defy him, ways that went unnoticed but gave her a sense of control. She would leave his chambers before he awoke, refusing to linger in his presence longer than necessary. She avoided his gaze during meals and spoke only when spoken to. These acts of quiet rebellion gave her strength, even as she endured the prince's increasing demands. The other wives were a constant source of tension for Ao. Each of them had suffered under the prince's rule, but instead of uniting, they turned on one another, vying for his attention and favor. Lady Ijeoma, the first wife, was the most vocal in her disdain for Ao. "You think you're better than us because you're younger and prettier," she sneered one evening. "You'll learn soon enough that beauty fades, and the prince's interest is fleeting." Ao tried to ignore the taunts, but the hostility wore on her. She longed for an ally, someone who understood her pain and could help her navigate the treacherous waters of palace life. As weeks turned into months, Ao began to dream of escape. She often thought of the village and the life she had been forced to leave behind. Most of all, she thought of Jimmy and the promises they had made to each other. One night, as she lay awake in her room, she whispered to herself. I have to find a way out of here. I can't stay trapped forever. She began to observe the palace guards, noting their routines and the times when the gates were least guarded. She spoke in hushed tones with Chica, who hinted that she might know of a secret passageway used by servants. Be careful, child, Chica warned. The prince is a dangerous man. If he suspects anything, he won't hesitate to punish you. Ao nodded, her resolve growing stronger. I have no choice, she said. I can't live like this. Meanwhile, in the city, Jimmy was preparing for his journey back to the village. He couldn't stop thinking about Ao and the life she must be enduring in the palace. The thought of her suffering filled him with guilt and anger. He began making inquiries, reaching out to contacts who could provide information about the palace and its workings. His wealth and influence opened doors, and he quickly learned that freeing Ao would not be an easy task. The prince is well guarded, one informant told him, and he doesn't take kindly to losing what he considers his property. Jimmy clenched his fists. Ao is not his property, he said through gritted teeth. She's the love of my life, and I'll do whatever it takes to save her. Back in the palace, Ao's situation grew more dire. The prince's cruelty escalated, and he began demanding that she attend to him in ways that made her skin crawl. One evening, after a particularly humiliating encounter, Ao sat in her room, tears streaming down her face. She thought of her father and his stories of courage. Be brave, my little star, he had always told her. Even in the darkest night, the stars still shine. Clinging to those words, Ao vowed to keep fighting. She would find a way to escape no matter the cost. Ao's days in the palace were filled with routine misery, but she never stopped searching for a way out. Each step she took in the grand halls felt like a step closer to freedom. Her courage grew, fueled by the memories of her father, her mother, and Jimmy. Unbeknownst to her, fate was quietly working in her favor. One evening, Chica slipped into Ao's room with an urgent expression. There's something I need to show you, she whispered. Ao followed Chica down a narrow hallway to a door hidden behind a tapestry. Chica pushed it open to reveal a dark, winding staircase. This passage leads to the outer courtyard, Chica explained. It's how the servants come and go without being noticed. Ao's heart leapt with hope. Why are you helping me? She asked, her voice trembling.
Chica placed a hand on Ao's shoulder. No one deserves to live as a prisoner. If I had the chance to save my daughter, I'd do the same. Ao hugged Chica tightly, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Jimmy arrived in Umuahia under the cover of night. The once familiar village felt smaller, quieter, and sadder than he remembered. He went straight to Mama Nkechi's home, his heart pounding with both anticipation and dread. When Mama Nkechi opened the door, her eyes widened in disbelief. Jimmy? Is it really you? Jimmy nodded, his voice thick with emotion. Mama Nkechi, I heard what happened to Ao. I'm here to bring her back. Mama Nkechi broke down in tears, clutching his hands. The palace is no place for my daughter. She's suffered so much. Please, save her. I will, Jimmy promised. No matter what it takes. Back in the palace, Ao began to devise her escape. The secret passage offered a way out, but she needed to time it perfectly. The palace was heavily guarded, especially at night, and any misstep could cost her life. Chica offered her advice. The guards are most distracted during the evening feast. If you leave then, you might have a chance. Ao nodded, determination hardening her resolve. She had waited long enough. It was time to act. Jimmy knew he couldn't take on the prince alone. He needed allies, and he found them in the unlikeliest places. Many of the villagers harbored resentment toward the royal family, particularly Prince Okoye. Among them was Obinna, a former palace guard who had been dismissed for defying the prince's orders. I'll help you, Obinna said, his voice filled with conviction. The prince has ruined too many lives. It's time someone stood up to him. Together, Jimmy and Obinna began to gather a small group of trusted allies. They planned to infiltrate the palace and rescue Ao before it was too late. The evening of the escape arrived, and Ao's heart raced as she prepared to leave. Chica handed her a bundle of food and a small dagger. "Be careful," Chica said, her voice shaking. "And don't look back." Ao hugged her tightly. "I'll never forget what you've done for me." As the palace erupted in laughter and music during the feast, Ao slipped into the secret passage. The narrow staircase was dark and damp, but she moved quickly, her bare feet silent against the stone. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as she reached the outer courtyard. Freedom was so close she could almost taste it. Just as Ao reached the outer gate, a shadow loomed in her path. It was Prince Okoye. "Did you really think you could escape me?" he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Ao froze, her mind racing. She gripped the dagger Chica had given her, her hands trembling. Before the prince could react, a loud commotion erupted behind him. Jimmy and his allies had arrived, their shouts echoing through the courtyard. "Let her go," Jimmy bellowed, his voice filled with fury. Prince Okoye turned, his expression shifting from smugness to rage. "Who dares to challenge me?" Jimmy stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "I'm here for Ao, and I won't leave without her." The courtyard became a battlefield as Jimmy and his allies clashed with the palace guards. Ao watched in awe and terror as Jimmy fought with a strength she had never seen before. "Run, Ao," Jimmy shouted. "Get to safety." But Ao couldn't leave him. Summoning her courage, she lunged at one of the guards who had pinned Obinna to the ground. Using the dagger, she managed to free him, and together they turned the tide of the fight. Prince Okoye, seeing his men falter, retreated into the palace. "This isn't over," he snarled before disappearing into the shadows. As the dust settled, Jimmy rushed to Ao's side. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Ao shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You came back for me," she whispered. "I promised I would," Jimmy said, pulling her into his arms. Obinna and the others urged them to leave quickly. "The prince will rally more guards. We need to get out of here now." Together, they fled into the night, leaving the palace and its horrors behind. The group moved swiftly through the dense forests that surrounded the palace, their breaths heavy and their hearts racing. The moonlight guided their path, casting silver beams through the towering trees. Ao clung to Jimmy's hand, her steps fueled by a mixture of fear and determination. For the first time in months, she felt the stirrings of hope. After hours of running, the group reached a small hideout, a wooden cabin Obinna had prepared in advance. They collapsed inside, their bodies exhausted, but their spirits unbroken. Jimmy lit a small lantern, its soft glow illuminating the room. He turned to Ao, his voice gentle but firm. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." Ao nodded, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought I'd never escape." Obinna spoke up. "We can't stay here long. The prince will send his men to search for her. We need a plan." Back at the palace, Prince Okoye was consumed with rage. He summoned his most loyal guards and ordered them to find Ao at any cost. "She belongs to me," he roared, slamming his fist onto a table. "No one defies me and lives to tell the tale." His words sent a shiver through the palace. Even his wives, who had once envied Ao, now felt pity for her. They knew the prince's cruelty all too well. As the days passed, Ao began to recover from her ordeal. The kindness of Jimmy and the others helped to heal the wounds in her heart, and she found herself growing stronger. One evening, as they sat around a fire, Ao spoke up. I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to stand up to him, not just for myself, but for everyone he's hurt. Jimmy looked at her, admiration shining in his eyes. You're braver than anyone I've ever known, he said. We'll stand with you. Together, they began to formulate a plan to confront the prince and bring an end to his tyranny. Jimmy and Obinna returned to the village to rally support. The villagers, long oppressed by the royal family, were eager to fight for their freedom. They formed a coalition, their numbers growing with each passing day. When the prince's men arrived in the village to search for Ao, they were met with resistance. The villagers drove them away, sending a clear message. The reign of fear was over. With the villagers united and the prince's forces weakened, the time came for the final confrontation. Ao, Jimmy, and their allies marched to the palace, their determination unshakable. When they reached the gates, the guards hesitated. Many of them, weary of the prince's cruelty, chose to stand down rather than fight. Prince Okoye, however, refused to surrender.
He confronted the group in the grand hall, his face twisted with rage. You dare challenge me in my own home, he spat. Ao stepped forward, her voice steady. Your home was built on the suffering of others. Your time is over. The prince lunged at her, but Jimmy intercepted him. The two men grappled, their fight a clash of strength and will. In the end, it was Jimmy who prevailed, pinning the prince to the ground. Your reign of terror ends here, Jimmy said, his voice cold. The villagers cheered, their voices echoing through the palace. With the prince overthrown, the kingdom entered a new era. The villagers elected a council to govern them, with Jimmy as their leader. His wisdom and compassion earned him the respect of all, and he worked tirelessly to rebuild the community. Ao became a symbol of resilience and hope. She shared her story with others, encouraging them to stand up against injustice. As Ao and Jimmy stood together under the mango tree where their journey began, Ao spoke softly. I've learned that no matter how dark the night, the dawn will always come. We must never lose hope, and we must always fight for what's right. Jimmy nodded, taking her hand. And we must never let fear silence us. Together, we can create a better world. The story of Ao and Jimmy teaches us the power of courage, love, and unity. No matter how great the odds, we must believe in ourselves and in the strength of those who stand with us. When faced with injustice, remember, it takes just one voice to spark a revolution. And when we fight for what's right, we not only change our own lives but the lives of those around us. The days after Prince Okoye's downfall were a mix of celebration and reflection. The villagers, once oppressed and silenced, rejoiced in their newfound freedom. The palace that once stood as a symbol of fear now opened its gates to the people, becoming a space for unity and rebuilding. But for Ao, Jimmy, and the others who had fought for this change, the journey was far from over. The scars of the past were deep, and healing would take time. The first step in healing the kingdom was to transform the palace into a place of hope. Jimmy, now elected as the governor by the Council of Villagers, ensured that the wealth hoarded by the royal family was distributed to the people. Food, land, and resources were shared among the community, and the once grand throne room became a meeting hall for discussing the village's future. Ao, with her newfound strength and purpose, led efforts to provide for widows, orphans, and those who had suffered most under the prince's rule. She organized groups to rebuild schools, markets, and homes, ensuring that every corner of the village felt the ripple of change. The women who had been the prince's wives faced their own struggles. Many of them had been forced into the palace against their will, just as Ao had. With the prince gone, they were free to leave, but freedom brought its own challenges. Ao reached out to them, offering support and understanding. She listened to their stories and encouraged them to rebuild their lives. We've all suffered in different ways, she told them, but we can find strength in each other. Some chose to stay and join the efforts to rebuild the community, while others returned to their families, determined to start anew. As the village flourished, Ao and Jimmy grew closer. Their shared experiences had deepened their bond, and they often found themselves reminiscing about their childhood under the mango tree. One evening, as they watched the sunset together, Jimmy turned to Ao. "You've changed so much," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." Ao smiled softly. "I had to be, but I couldn't have done it without you." Jimmy took her hand, his eyes serious. "Ao, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Not just as your childhood friend, but as your partner in everything. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Ao's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Jimmy. I've always loved you." Their engagement was celebrated with joy by the entire village, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. Despite the happiness that surrounded them, Ao couldn't forget the lessons she had learned from her ordeal. She often spoke to the villagers, sharing her story and urging them to remain vigilant. "Evil thrives when good people do nothing," she told them one day during a gathering. "We must never allow fear or greed to take root in our hearts. And we must always stand together, because unity is our greatest strength." A message to the next generation. One of Ao's most important missions was to ensure that future generations learned from the past. She worked with Jimmy to establish schools where children could learn not only to read and write but also about courage, kindness, and justice. "The world will always have challenges," she told a group of children one day. "But you must remember that you have the power to make it better. Be brave, be kind, and never forget the strength that lies in standing up for what is right." The children listened intently, their eyes shining with hope. A community reborn. Over time, the village of Umwahia became a thriving community. The people worked together to build a future where everyone could live with dignity and peace. The fields were lush with crops, the markets bustled with activity, and the laughter of children echoed through the streets. The mango tree where Ao and Jimmy had shared so many memories became a symbol of resilience and love. It stood tall in the heart of the village, its branches providing shade and comfort to all who gathered beneath it. Ao's story became a legend, passed down from one generation to the next. It was a tale of courage, love, and the power of unity, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a way forward. As she stood beneath the mango tree one evening, surrounded by her people, Ao offered one final piece of advice. Never let fear silence your voice. Never let injustice go unchallenged. And never forget that together, we are stronger than any force that seeks to divide us. The villagers cheered, their voices ringing with hope and determination. The years passed, and the village of Umwahia flourished like never before. The story of how Ao, Jimmy, and the people stood up against Prince Okoye became the heartbeat of the community. It was a tale etched into their hearts, a constant reminder of the power of love, resilience, and unity. Ao and Jimmy, now happily married, worked tirelessly to ensure that the future of their people remained bright. Together, they built a foundation of trust, hope, and opportunity for all. Ao and Jimmy welcomed their first child, a baby girl they named Ifyinanya, meaning love in Igbo. Ifyinanya was a symbol of their journey, a beacon of hope born out of struggle. As Ifyinanya grew, Ao often sat her under the mango tree and told her the story of their village. "You are a child of courage," Ao would say. "Never forget where you come from and the sacrifices made for you to live freely." Jimmy would join them, adding, "Always stand for what is right, my daughter. The world will test your values, but your heart must remain steadfast." Their words were not just for Ifyinanya but for all the children of the village. As the years went by, Ao became more than a leader. She became a mother figure to the entire village. People came to her for advice, comfort, and guidance. She helped resolve disputes, supported families in need, and ensured that no one was left behind. She also established an annual festival celebrating unity and resilience. During the festival, Villagers reenacted the story of their fight against the prince, ensuring that future generations would always remember the importance of standing together. Jimmy's role as governor brought significant changes to the village. He built roads, schools, and healthcare centers, ensuring that the people had access to the resources they needed. His leadership was marked by fairness and integrity, and he became a role model for the youth. When his term as governor ended, the people urged him to run for king. Jimmy initially hesitated, but Ao encouraged him. "You have the heart of a leader," she said. "If you don't lead, who will?" With Ao's support, Jimmy became king, and together they transformed the monarchy into a system of service rather than dominance. The final lesson. On the day of their 10th wedding anniversary, Ao and Jimmy gathered the villagers under the mango tree. The air was filled with excitement and joy as the couple prepared to share their reflections. Ao spoke first. "Life is a journey filled with trials and triumphs. There will be moments when you feel like giving up, but it's in those moments that you must remember your strength. We are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond." Jimmy added, "Power is not in wealth or position. It is in the love and respect of those around you. Always use your voice to uplift others and your hands to build, not destroy." The villagers listened intently, their hearts swelling with pride and gratitude for their leaders. Ao and Jimmy's story became a guiding light, not just for their village but for neighboring communities. People came from far and wide to hear their wisdom, inspired by their courage and resilience. Their lives were a testament to the power of unity, the strength of love, and the importance of standing up for what is right. As the sun set on the village, casting a golden glow over the mango tree, Ao looked at the crowd gathered before her and said, "Never underestimate the power of your voice. One person's courage can ignite a revolution. Stand firm in your values, and never let fear dictate your actions. And above all, remember this. Together, we can overcome anything." The villagers erupted into cheers, their voices carrying her words far and wide. With the foundations of justice and compassion firmly in place, Umuahia entered a golden age. The village became a haven of prosperity and happiness, a shining example of what could be achieved through unity and determination. Ao and Jimmy, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the love of their people, watched as their legacy continued to grow. And under the shade of the mango tree, where their journey had begun, they found peace. The end. Thank you for watching. Hope you learned something from this story. If you're new here, please subscribe to our channel, comment, like, and share our stories to your loved ones. And kindly turn on the notification bell to be notified anytime we post interesting stories like this. We celebrate you. Bye.